Hello everyone, welcome to Learning Libraries. This is Anjana starting a new video. This is grade 9 Social Science CBSE chapter 1, the French Revolution. This is part 1 of the lesson. So let's proceed. So before that I would like to ask, did you all know who started the French nationalism? Nationalism is nothing but a feeling of oneness, that instead of having multiple authorities and multiple symbols, a country should follow one language, one religion, one custom, whereby people are united for lifetime and the life of people moves in a very simple and very smooth manner. For that, people had to fight a lot. But who gave this idea? So this idea was given by the Enlightenment philosophers. Basically, they were a group of people who were telling the people how to come out of monarchy, that is a rule by king and supported by the church. Both king and the church together were oppressing the people. They are collecting taxes as well as asking for extra grants and money, and these the people, the normal common people, had to pay taxes as well as support the church, which was a burden for them, in, including the weather conditions, the atmosphere, environment, personal development, everything. So this puts a lot of pressure on common people. They can't live their life in a very peaceful manner. They have to be obliged always to the state. So let's see what happened actually in France and how people started this revolution. So what happened is, on the morning of 14th July 1789, the city of Paris was in a state of alarm. The king had commanded troops to move into the city. Rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia. They broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms. Finally, a group of several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Basel, where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition. In the armed fight that followed, the commander of Basel was killed and the prisoners released. Though there were only 7 of them, yet the Basel was hated by all because it stood for the despotic power of the king. The fortress was demolished and its stone fragments were sold in the market to all those who wished to keep a souvenir of its destruction. So basically, ammunitions are nothing but weapons. So there was a place where a lot of guns were kept. So people wanted to attack the king who lived in the castle. They wanted to tell the king or wanted to display to the king the conditions, the very pathetic condition in which these people were living, not having enough money, not having enough food, and traumatized by the climate conditions, and no support from both the church and as well as the government, that is the king. So, what they wanted to do with the weapon? In the armed fight that followed, the commander of the Basel was killed and prisoners released, though there were only 7 of them. Yes, yet the Basel was hated by all because it stood for the despotic power of the king. The fortress was demolished and its stone fragments were sold in the markets to all those who wished to keep a souvenir of its destruction. So basically, the fortress was completely demolished. People were very angry. They wanted to show the king what they can do, what a mob of angry people can do if they are hungry. They are hungry for more than, they are hungry for food, they are hungry for, they are thirsty, they need water, and lot of things. The days that followed saw more rioting both in Paris and the countryside. Most people were protesting against the high prices of bread. Much later, when historians look back upon this time, they saw it as the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to the execution of the king in France, though most people at the time did not anticipate this outcome. How and why did this happen? So basically, people wanted to punish the king, and this incident of what which happened in France set a stage for revolution in entire Europe. Okay, France was like a torchbearer, the starter, and followed by every other European countries started changing. They started bringing change in themselves, and we'll be reading in detail in this about the other European countries. Details have been given in 10th standard chapter 1. This chapter only deals with the French nationalism and revolution. So basically you can see a figure here how the storming of the Basel has been happened, and soon after that the demolition of Basel, artist made prints commemorating the event. So basically you can see smoke coming out of the Basel. It's like a castle where the king used to live. So it was attacked, and weapons, it was bombed basically. And you see the smoke. Okay. So what, how was the French society? Because if something has to happen of this huge kind, like a revolution where a building is being attacked and people are targeting the king, so something has to have happened. Something would have been the cause of all these things. So we have to go and understand the society at first. So basically when we see this figure, you can see a pyramidal structure, or like a dependency, where we can see as this society, the French society particularly, was actually divided into three estates. Estates comprises of group of people doing various works, and in this, the first group were the clergy. They were part of the church. They are religious authorities who used to guide the states. Second estate belong to nobility. They are the kings and soldiers. Their work is to safeguard the kingdom, as well as govern, rule the kingdom, bring welfare for the kingdom, and taking care. The third estate comprised of the normal common people. But even in the common people, there were different kinds. The first kind were the big businessmen, merchants, court officials, and lawyers. These were some of the well off people, common people, who had access to money, education, and were not much affected by the king or the church. Next were the peasants and artisans, basically the farmers and the craft persons, people who used to work on wood and everything. Small peasants, landless labor, and servants comprised of the third part of the third estate. So these people were more or less affected a lot. These people faced a lot of problems, and these people grew in number, and they were part of the revolution in large. So basically, who was this king who lived in this Basel? And who was this king who traumatized people, who attacked people, or who made people attack him? So in 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was 20-year-old. He was 20-year-old and married. He was 20-year-old and married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found an empty treasury. Long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy Britain. The war added more than a billion livres to a debt that had already risen more than 2 billion livres. Lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loans. So the French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budget on interest payments alone. To meet its regular expenses, such as the cost of maintaining an army, the court, running government offices or universities, the state was forced to increase taxes. Yet even this measure would not have sufficed. The French society in 18th century was divided into three estates and only member of the third estates paid the tax. So basically when the king took over, that took over the kingdom, a lot of problems were happening at the same time. His court was very huge. That is, the court comprises of ministers. So the ministers were a group of large number. They had to be maintained, regular meetings has to occur. So it was expensive. Not only that, they were helping the Americans to gain independence. It was not a easy act. They had to help monetarily, they had to help with weapons and ammunitions. So basically they had to help another country when they were themselves in a crisis. And who were actually paying all these things? It was not the king or the church, it was the common people, people who were part of the third estate, including businessmen, peasants, small peasants. So all these people were the one who were paying the taxes. So this society, the society of estates, was part of the feudal system that dated back to Middle Ages. Basically, this feudal system existed in village communities where there are layers of people and few learned officials. There are farmers, small time workers, and there are merchants, lawyers who have got some education and they have a separate identity and don't work in the farm. So basically, the feudal system, each people are dependent on each other, and it's important part of the village lifestyle. It's an economic system. It's basically economic system, and in the system the church forms the highest order, next comes the king, and next comes the common people. Okay, the term old regime is usually used to describe the society and institutions of France before 1789. So 1789 is the period of change. Before that, old regime, that's the word used for France. And these three estates, basically the revolution will break the concept of the third estate only being responsible for taxes. So this brings us to some new words. So you have understood there are some words given there. Livre. So livre is a unit of currency in France, and it was discontinued in 1794. Clergy. So group of persons invested with functions in the special functions in the church. So what is tithe and tile? Let's come back to this after some time. Let me read this paragraph and then I'll come back to the last two words. Figure 2 shows how the system of estates in French society was organized. Peasants made up about 90% of the population. However, only a small number of them owned the land they cultivated. About 60% of the land was owned by the nobles, the church, and other rich members of the third estates. The member of the first two estate, that is The clergy and the nobility enjoyed certain privileges by birth. The most important of these was exemption from paying taxes to the states. The nobles further enjoyed privileges. These included feudal dues, which they extracted from the peasants. Peasants were obliged to render service to the lords, to work in his house and fields, to serve in the army, or to participate in the building roads. So basically, peasants were not only farmers, during the non agricultural season, they used to work in different other areas, and basically, they were the one who were paying the taxes. The church too extended its share of taxes called tithes from the peasants, and finally, all members of the third estates had to pay the taxes to the state. So, this included a direct tax called tally, and a number of indirect taxes which were levied on articles of everyday consumption like salt or tobacco. The burden of financing activities of the state through taxes was borne by the third estate alone. That is, the entire expense, whatever the king was facing the problem, whether to help the Americans or whether to maintain his own ministry, all money was coming from the common people, and even the church was extracting money. So there were two words: tithe, it means a tax levied by the church comprising one tenth of the agricultural produce. Basically, they were farmers, so they had to give some part of their produce. If they're growing a bag of 10 bag of tomatoes, so one tenth had to be handed over to the church, and then tax paid to the state. Apart from that, they also had to pay to the state. So you can see here a figure, and you can see here two people interacting. So what does this say? Figure 3, the spider and the fly. An anonymous is etching. The nobleman is the spider, the peasant is the fly. The more the devil has, the more he wants. This poor fellow brings everything: grains, fruits, money, salad. The fat lord sits there ready to accept it. He does not even care to grease him with a look. So basically, you can see how arrogant the king is. This person belonging to the peasant community is bringing a lot of things, and the person sitting in the king's position, he could be a soldier as well, he's not even considering him. He's just taking things, whether he's providing food, vegetables, money, or any salad. So this is the total dependency, and there was not even a single caring feeling. So the struggle to survive, basically the last estate, the third estate, was struggling a lot to survive. The population of France rose from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand. So the price of bread, which was the staple diet of the majority, rose rapidly. Most workers were employed as laborers in workshops whose owner fixed their wages. But wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. So the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. This led to a subsistence crisis, something that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. So, what is subsistence crisis? An extreme situation where the basic means of livelihood are endangered. Basically, there's not even a food, one day meal. Even for one day meal, they have to struggle. One time food also, they have to struggle a lot. Subsistence means living. Anonymous. Anonymous, one whose name remains unknown. So basically, kept secret. Anonymous means something that has been kept secret, not known to others. So again, you can see how subsistence crisis happens. How did this happen? How did people come to a situation where they have to think about even one time meal. So basically, the bad harvest, poorest can no longer buy food, and disease epidemics. So there were some reasons what was happening, because it was crop were getting failed, lack of rain or even more rain were causing the crops to fail, and it was resulting in bad harvest. Poorest can no longer buy the food. The poorest people were not able to buy bread. The cost of the bread rose rapidly. Disease epidemics, so fever, diseases started spreading. So all these led to crisis where people couldn't actually support themselves. So what happened was there was a growth of a middle class, a growing middle class envisaged end to privileges. How to stop this? So there was some group of people who were educated, wanted to go to the next level. They were in a middle level. They were not completely farmers, not completely part of the nobility and church. They wanted to bring some changes in the society. They were called the middle class. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity. But they lacked the means and programs to carry out full scale measures that would bring about a change in the social and economic order. This was left to those groups within the third estate who became prosperous and had access to education and new ideas. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups termed the middle class, who earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade and from the manufacture of goods such as woolen and silk textile that were either exported or brought by the richer members of the society. In addition to merchants and manufacturers, the third estate included professions such as lawyers or administrative officials. All of these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must be dependent on his merit. These ideas, envisaging a society based on freedom and equal laws, an opportunity for all, were put forward by philosophers such as John Locke and Jean Jacques Rousseau. In his two treatises of government, Locke sought to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of the monarch. Rousseau carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on social contract between people and their representative. In the spirit of the laws, Montesquieu proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative and the executive and the judiciary. This model of government was put in force in the USA after the 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain. The American Constitution and its guarantee of individual rights was an important example for political thinkers in France. So basically, you can see that different thinkers have helped a lot. These people are known as the Enlightenment thinkers. I asked right in the beginning of the video, how did French nationalism start? So it started with views, ideas of these people. Okay, these people, these different John Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu, they gave different ideas which were adopted by the government, and they started thinking that they no longer needed a king. Instead, they needed a group of people who can handle the problem of the citizens, which is today done. Today, many of the countries don't have kings, they have a group of people who are the representative, and most of the governments are divided into legislature, executive, and judiciary. This model has been followed in USA first, followed by every other countries, and USA was helped by France. Even though it put a lot of pressure on France, then also the USA got benefited. The ideas of these philosophers were discussed intensively in in salon and coffee houses and spread among people through books and newspapers. These were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit of those who could not read and write. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes to be able to meet the expenses of the state generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. So basically, these philosophers gave a lot of ideas. They brought changes, and people were talking about them. People, common people need a new thing, new. So common people needed just a reason, and that rumors spread soon, and people wanted change. They started talking about it in coffee houses. They started gossiping about changes, and gradually it spread among the middle class, and it became a very huge protest. People started showing their anger against Louis XVI. So, what happened? The outbreak of the revolution. So, what exactly happened? Okay, and how did people come out? How did they? We know the cause, and we now know how people were motivated by thinkers. But now we have to see how this movement was started and who took forward the movement, who supported the movement, and what happened to Louis XVI. That's what we are going to see. Okay, so basically, what happened? Louis XVI had to increase taxes for reasons you have learnt in the previous section. So, we already know that Louis XVI had to increase the taxes for supporting America and for maintaining his own government. For that, also, he needed. So, basically, he needed for a lot of reasons. So, how do you think he could have gone about doing this? In France of the old regime, the monarch did not have the power to impose tax according to his will. Rather, he had to call a meeting of the general estates which would then pass his proposals for new taxes. The estate general was a political body to which three estates sent their representative. However, the monarch alone could decide when to call a meeting of this body. The last time it was done was in 1614. On 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the Estates General to pass proposals for new taxes. A resplendent hall in Versailles was prepared to host the delegates. The first and second estates sent 300 representatives each, who were seated in rows facing each other on two sides. While the 600 members of third estates had to stand at the back, the third estate was represented by its more prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans, women were denied entry to the assembly. However, their grievances and demands were listed in some 40,000 letters which the representatives brought with them. So basically, there was two regimes, old regime and new regime. The old regime, in old regime, the king did not actually have lot of privilege. It was a good monarchy, where the king had to, king would not be given the privilege of taking taxes. A committee would be set up, and they would be taking the taxes and distributing, and the king will get a minimum sum, which was a good system. But Louis XVI had lot of expenditures, and he wanted all the tax income for him. So now he's establishing a new estate and new assembly where first and second estates represented 300 members. So the first two estates got 300 seats, and 600 members will be coming from the third estates, but not from very small background. They were from a good wealthy background like teachers, lawyers, doctors, all those people. They didn't call the common people, but they took the problems. noted down the problems of common people in letters. In some 40,000 letters, which the representatives had brought with them. Voting in the estate generals in the past had been conducted according to the principle that each estate had one vote. This time too, Louis XVI was determined to continue the same practice. But members of the third estate demanded that voting now be conducted by the assembly as a whole, where each member would have one vote. This was one of the democratic principles put forward by philosophers like Rousseau in his book The Social Contract. When the king rejected this proposal, members of the Third Estate walked out of the assembly in protest. The representatives of the Third Estates viewed themselves as spokesmen for the whole French nation. On 20th June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. They declared themselves National Assembly and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. They were labeled by Mirabeau and Abbassies. Mirabeau was born in a noble family but convinced of the need to do away with the society of feudal privilege. He brought out a journal and delivered powerful speeches to the crowds assembled at Versailles. So basically, these members, they felt as they are the citizens of France. They are not only the members; they are the part of the France, and they felt that they knew all the problems. So they started representing themselves. So they declared themselves as National Assembly. So they said, till we make a constitution, what is constitution? It's a set of rules. Today each country follows constitution called a set of rules by which a country is governed. So basically constitution came up then. The word constitution means a set of guidelines that government should follow, and these guidelines has been set up according to the people's right, not according to age old principles or any other religious customs. It's based on law and legal authority. Abbai says, originally a priest, wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? Abbai says he is one of the priests. Priest means person who works in a religious place. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of the France was seized with turmoil. So basically, when the government was being set up and Louis was concentrating on changing the taxes, bringing some new changes in the government, here the countryside problems were occurring. So we are seeing the cause of revolution. Why did people storm to the Bastille and why did people kill Louis? Because while Louis was in the government making changes, here in the countryside, what had happened? Something severe had happened. A severe winter meant a bad harvest. The prices of bread rose. Often bakers exploited the situation and hoarded supply. Hoarded supply means collected lot of supplies because existing supply there was a very bad harvest and existing supply was hit. So they began collecting lot of supplies. Okay, after spending hours in long queues at the bakery, crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. At the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris. On 14th July, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. In the countryside, rumors spread from village to village that the lords of the manor had hired bands of brigands who were on their way to destroy the ripe crops. Caught in a frenzy of fear, peasants in several districts seized hoes and pitchforks and attacked Chittox. They looted, hoarded grain, and burned down documents containing records of manorial duties. There were duties, big manors, palaces were there, and there were so many servants and things were recorded in the manor. So everything was hoarded, taken. Okay, a large number of nobles fled from their homes, many of them migrating to neighboring cities. So people began moving here and there, collecting things from very wealthy houses, stealing things and putting it in their house. So many of the soldiers were being troubled by the normal farmers because farmers themselves did not have any money. It was bad harvest was happening, but these soldiers will keep on asking taxes. Faced with the power of his revolting subjects, Louis XVI finally accorded recognition to the National Assembly and accepted the principle that his powers would from now be checked by a constitution. On the night of 4th August 1789, the Assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of obligations and taxes. Members of the clergy too were forced to give up their privileges. Tithes were abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. As a result, the government acquired assets, assets worth of 2 billion livres. So let us see figure 6, spread of great fear. So this is the great fear. You can see lot of places, Paris, Estres, Amais. So the map shows how band of peasants spread from one point to another. So went from place to place, collected products, started settling in different places because the crops were giving bad harvest. No flowers, no grains. So people were running here and there and suffering. They were attacking the soldiers, collecting products from them. So it was a very tough situation. So France became a constitutional monarchy. So revolution means changes. Okay, big change that happens. So what change happened? They no longer wanted a king. So when they no longer wanted a king, what is the alternate? What will happen in exchange? But they can't take away the monarchical system together. It is a old age old system. So they just bought some rules. They made some rules for the kings to follow. So we call it as constitutional monarchy. Monarchy means rule of the king. But when we add constitution, that means the king also has to follow some rules. So the National Assembly completed the draft of the constitution in 1791. Its main object was to limit the powers of the monarch. These powers, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, were now separated and assigned to different institutions: the legislature, executive, and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. Figure 7 explains how the new political system worked. So basically, earlier, king controlled everything and it was getting out of control. He couldn't manage anything, bad crops, because that is new regime. Old regime said king should listen to others, but that was taken away, and Louis XVI started taking more and more taxes. But now again there was a national assembly, and now Louis XVI cannot take independent decision. He was killed. Yeah, he was killed. So now according to a constitution, a monarchy was being established. So the government now has been divided into three parts: judiciary, executive and legislature, and king is part of the executive. There will be a separate judge and there will be group of legislators who will check the works of king. King has to take the advice. He cannot take independent decisions. Voting will happen. King will not be selected through vote. He will be selected by the family background. But the members of National Assembly would be selected by vote. So this is the first voting system. One of the first voting system where active citizens, that is about 4 million people, started voting. And who did not have voting rights? There are some people who did not have voting rights. That were women, children and youth. Anybody below 25 cannot vote. Now things have changed. If you see the voting age in India, it's 18. Anybody below 18 cannot vote. But women can vote. But that was a time when women were not allowed to vote. So that's some discrimination happening. The Constitution of 1791 vested the power to make laws in the National Assembly, which was indirectly elected. That is, citizens voted for a group of electors who in turn chose the assembly. Not all citizens, however, had the right to vote. Only men about 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens. That is, they were entitled to vote. The remaining men and all women were classed as passive citizens. To qualify as an elector and then as a member of the assembly, a man had to belong to the highest bracket of taxpayers. So basically you can see this is 8. The Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens, painted by Lee Barbier in 1790. The figure on the right represents France. The figure on the left symbolizes the law. So you can see two angels. So one is France, another is law. Land is important, country also is. Law is important, country is important. Law, who makes the law? It is for the people's right. It's not for some king who is sitting from age old time and he is taking money and not even thinking about people. But now people's right also mattered. But still this was one-sided because women were not included. It was still one-sided. But still a great change had happened. This is one of the first rights given in a written manner. Anything that is written is more valuable. If you just say, it's okay. But whatever you write, it matters a lot. Written words matter a lot. So you can see some more symbols here: the broken chain, bundle, scripture, cap. So basically by the end of the first video, first part of class 9 chapter 1 history, what we see is that there has been a revolution, that is a change has been brought. Common people have brought the change and they have made sure that there is a constitutional monarchy. That is, King Louis was dead and now the king had to take advice from a group of people called National Assembly who were voted. King will not be voted by people. King will be from the background, from dynastic background, but he had to take decision with the advice of National Assembly. So it was a change and also there were rights. So who basically started this? Philosophers like Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu. So these people, Enlightenment philosophers, started the French nationalism. So with this we come to the end of the first part of the video. Do continue and wait for the next part. Thank you.